It was October 1942, and the Guadalcanal campaign in the Pacific had reached a vicious stalemate. The Japanese and the Americans were locked in a brutal struggle, neither side able to push the other out of the Solomon Islands. Reinforcements, weapons and supplies poured into the region from both nations, prolonging the bloody deadlock. The Japanese had temporarily taken the USS Enterprise out of action weeks earlier, stripping the Americans of their naval superiority, yet the US still retained control of the skies, largely due to their capture and rehabilitation of Henderson Field at Lunga Point. That airfield became the center of gravity for the entire campaign. If the Japanese succeeded in recapturing it, they could dominate both sea and air, which would almost certainly doom the American foothold on Guadalcanal. For that reason, the US Navy and the Marines considered holding Henderson Field the single most critical objective of the campaign. The struggle over Guadalcanal soon evolved into a grinding war of attrition. The Allies had air supremacy during the day, but Japanese naval power was a constant threat, especially at night when American warplanes could not operate effectively. Every day, American supply planes brought in reinforcements and provisions, while at night the Japanese sent convoys of destroyers and fast transports in what became known as the Tokyo Express. Both sides tried to cut these lifelines, but neither could decisively sever the other's supply chain. The Japanese launched repeated assaults on Henderson Field, yet the Marines repelled them each time. However, when the Japanese severely damaged USS Enterprise and left only one American carrier operational in the region, they sensed a golden opportunity. Between October 20th and October 25th, the Japanese launched a major offensive to retake the airfield. The Imperial Navy, believing that its ground forces might succeed, moved its fleets into supporting positions. But the US Marines fought back fiercely and neutralized the attack. Once the Japanese realized their land offensive had failed, their fleets lingered in the area, hoping to lure weakened American carriers into open battle. If they could destroy the remaining US ships, they believed recapturing Guadalcanal and its airfield would become far easier. Meanwhile, the USS Enterprise, which had barely survived the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, was undergoing expedited repairs. Initially, it was expected to be out of action for months, but the US Navy understood how desperately the carrier was needed and rushed the process. In barely a month, Enterprise was restored and ready for battle, carrying Air Group 10, famously nicknamed the Grim Reapers under Commander James H. Flatley. The plan was for Enterprise to join with USS Hornet, the only other operational American carrier in the region. Together, they would form a force of 2 fleet carriers, 1 battleship, 3 heavy cruisers, 3 light cruisers, 12 destroyers, and 136 aircraft. This combined task force was placed under the overall command of Rear Admiral Thomas Kincaid. On October 25th, they sailed toward the Santa Cruz Islands. The Japanese, aware that Enterprise had returned to duty, prepared their own massive fleet. Their forces were divided into 3 groups that included 2 fleet carriers, 2 light carriers, 4 battleships, 8 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, 24 destroyers, and nearly 200 aircraft. Enterprise, which had narrowly avoided destruction once already, was about to face her greatest test. The first contact between the 2 sides came late on October 25th, when an American PBY Catalina patrol plane sighted the Japanese fleet. Kincaid, though badly outnumbered, believed surprise might give him an edge. He immediately ordered a strike force of 23 aircraft to attack. However, the Japanese, realizing they had been spotted, shifted their fleet northward at high speed, evading the American attack. The 23 planes returned without finding their targets. The next day, the fleets finally sighted each other directly. Although American scouts located the enemy first, a communication error delayed the US response. This mistake gave the Japanese a crucial 20-minute advantage, allowing them to launch a massive strike of dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and fighters directed at USS Hornet. On the American side, only to SBD, Dauntless scout planes had reached the Japanese carriers in time, but they managed to score a critical hit on the light carrier Zhuehu. dropping 500-pound bombs that disabled her flight deck and temporarily prevented her from launching aircraft by 8 o'clock in the morning. Both navies were launching successive strike groups into the air. Roughly 40 minutes later, American and Japanese aircraft formations crossed paths in the skies. The Japanese Zero fighters took advantage of the sun's position to surprise the Americans, diving on the Grim Reapers as they climbed. A furious dogfight erupted. 4 Japanese fighters were shot down, but the Americans also lost 3 Wildcats and 2 torpedo bombers, while additional planes were badly damaged and forced to withdraw. The skies over the Pacific quickly became a chaotic battlefield filled with tracers, burning wreckage, and desperate maneuvers as pilots fought for survival. The battle only intensified. A Japanese strike group soon located Hornet's task force. Within 3 minutes, American radar picked up the incoming attackers, and the fleet scrambled 37 Wildcats to intercept. Unfortunately, confusion in communication and poor coordination weakened the American defense. Many fighters failed to intercept the enemy in time, leaving Hornet and her escorts dangerously exposed as the Japanese attackers bore down on them. The disastrous lapse in defense allowed 20 Japanese torpedo bombers and 16 dive bombers to break through and bear down on Hornet without serious opposition. At precisely 9:12 a.m., a Japanese dive bomber released a 250-kilogram semi-armor piercing bomb that plunged into Hornet's flight deck, detonating with a deafening roar and killing 60 men in an instant. Fires erupted as smoke billowed into the sky, and chaos swept across the deck. Just seconds later, another plane dropped a 242-kilogram high-explosive bomb that tore through the steel and blasted an 11-foot crater, killing 30 more sailors. Before the crew could react, a third bomb came screaming down and struck near the first impact point, punching through 3 decks before exploding deep within the ship and magnifying the destruction. Hornet shuddered from the blows as debris, flames, and wounded men scattered across her decks. Despite the furious wall of anti-aircraft fire thrown up by Hornet and her escorts, Japanese aircraft pressed their attack relentlessly. At 9:14 a.m., one burning bomber, riddled by Hornet's gunners, deliberately slammed itself into the carrier, its wreckage igniting further blazes across the flight deck. Barely a minute later, torpedo planes pierced the perimeter defenses and scored 2 hits against Hornet's starboard side, ripping into her hull and knocking out her engines. The mighty carrier, crippled, lost power, and drifted helplessly. As if to seal her fate, yet another dive bomber deliberately hurled itself into her deck, splashing aviation fuel that ignited into a firestorm. In a matter of minutes, Hornet had been savaged by a cascade of bombs, torpedoes, and suicide crashes. Her decks were littered with twisted wreckage, her engines silent, her crew exhausted, yet still fighting to save their ship. Despite these horrors, American anti-aircraft gunners fought with determination, bringing down 25 Japanese aircraft before the battered survivors retreated toward their carriers. Firefighting teams raced into action, hoses blasting water and foam as men struggled against suffocating smoke. By 10 a.m., the worst of the flames were brought under control. But Hornet was dead in the water, a floating hulk amidst the Pacific swells. The weight of the battle now shifted to USS Enterprise. Enterprise, the last operational American carrier on the scene, was accompanied by battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, but her escorts could only do so much. She was the prime target for the next waves of Japanese attacks. Her flight deck was crowded with aircraft desperately trying to land or take off, while others circled low on fuel. Pilots, unable to find a place to touch down, were forced to ditch their planes in the sea, where destroyers dashed to haul them from the waves. At 10:10 a.m., a Japanese strike force arrived, and the gunners aboard Enterprise opened fire. Black puffs of flak exploding in the sky as several enemy planes spiraled down in flames. But more were coming. Moments later, another strike appeared. Through the clouds, this one led by Lieutenant Keiichi Arima, to 250-kilogram bombs smashed into Enterprise, tearing holes in her deck and wrecking the forward elevator. Fires broke out, men scrambled to contain them, and smoke cloaked the ship, yet Enterprise endured. The Japanese, however, suffered badly in the attempt, losing 10 of 19 aircraft to the storm of defensive fire. Then came 16 torpedo planes from Zuikaku, splitting into groups to attack Enterprise and her escorts, South Dakota and Portland. American ships twisted and turned violently in the water, dodging the deadly wakes of torpedoes that streaked past within yards. Enterprise became the centerpiece of this desperate dance, swinging her bulk through sharp turns to evade 9 separate torpedoes, each one narrowly missing. The crew watched in awe and disbelief as death brushed past again and again. 9 of the attacking planes were destroyed, but the Japanese pressure showed no sign of easing. Meanwhile, more American aircraft trickled back toward the fleet, their fuel tanks nearly empty, with nowhere safe to land. Enterprise reopened her battered flight deck to begin recovering aircraft. But even as the first wheels touched down, yet another Japanese wave appeared. At 11:21 a.m., bombers dived from the sky, aiming for the carrier already wreathed in smoke. No direct hits were made, but the concussions of near misses rattled her hull and inflicted further damage to critical systems. The exhausted crew continued their fight, but Admiral Kincaid, assessing the situation with Hornet paralyzed, Enterprise damaged, and reports suggesting 1 or 2 Japanese carriers still intact, made the difficult decision to withdraw. Enterprise managed to bring down 57 of the 73 U.S. planes still aloft, while Hornet received temporary patchwork repairs as the light cruiser Northampton took her in tow. The relief was short-lived. Another sudden Japanese strike zeroed in on the helpless Hornet, delivering a torpedo that shattered the repairs and sealed her fate. The order to abandon ship was given, and sailors leaped into the sea as bombs continued to rain down. Destroyers Mustin and Anderson were ordered to scuttle the carrier, but before they could finish the task, Japanese destroyers Makagumo and Akagumo closed in and fired their own torpedoes. Hornet finally succumbed, rolling and sinking beneath the waves, her once proud silhouette vanishing into the deep. At first glance, the Japanese appeared to have won a decisive triumph. They had destroyed Hornet and left Enterprise limping. Yet beneath the surface, the victory was hollow. As the Japanese awaited their returning air crews, the truth became clear. Lieutenant Commander Masataka Okamiya later recalled searching the skies and seeing only a handful of planes staggering back. Every fuselage riddled with holes, every pilot exhausted. The Japanese had lost half of their embarked carrier aircraft and 148 irreplaceable pilots, many of them veterans whose skills could never be replicated quickly. The Americans, by contrast, had lost only 26 aviators. Although their carriers were bloodied, they had inflicted a devastating attrition on Japan's air power. Strategically, it was the Japanese who were weakened most by the battle. Enterprise, though battered, was hastily repaired and pressed back into service as the lone shield between the Japanese carriers and the American fleet. Despite Hornet's loss, the United States was in a stronger position to contest the skies over Guadalcanal. Japan had damaged the enemy, but in doing so had burned through its own elite air strength. Soon, Zuikaku was ordered to withdraw, and, once again, the campaign in the Solomons slid into stalemate. A stalemate that increasingly tilted in favor of the Americans who could replace their losses while Japan could not. Asterisk.